So today we have, I think, the third in what I might call a trilogy. We have been looking at how we perceive things. And I hope that the men that I invited for supper way back in December and then who came back to speak again about their perceptions and the wisdom that they've acquired throughout their, most of them, 70 plus years, have heard the themes that were reflected in those conversations in these 3 Sunday events. I have determined that this very short snippet of Jesus could very well be the theme for the rest of our life together, because goodness knows it's all about perception. So I'm going to read the same verse I read the last 2 Sundays, and then I've got another one which is quite interesting upon the same theme. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. I remember always hearing this as fairly harsh, but Jesus, who is just the master of metaphor and analogy, is really just suggesting to us that a change in perception will put us in that place of wholeness and healing and healthy community, or throw us into a place where everyone and everything is an enemy. And this very small passage from Matthew chapter 7, we all know this one. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take that speck out of your eye, while the log is still in your own eye? Isn't that great? Wisdom that never gets old. So I have 3 sets of thoughts. And my intention is to kind of stand in a particular place, share with what we see at that particular place, and kind of do that on for 3 different movements. Just to illustrate how complex this calling is we have to wrestle with the whole idea of living in abundance and compassion. So some of you may be big fans of the program Ideas on CBC Radio, and a few weeks back one of the groups of episodes was called Traveling Across America 1 year after the election of Trump. The man who is the host to telling this story is a Yankee, and he has traveled down to Alabama. And he says, this is my home and native land, but there is absolutely nothing familiar about this place for me. And he starts his documentary at a gun show in Alabama, where I think, if I recall correctly, it will cost you $8 to get in if you're an adult, but children get in free. Okay, but remember the thing about the speck and the log, right? I'm trying to like put it all together. So he starts having a conversation with one of the vendors at the gun fair, and this woman comes up, and she has an Eastern European accent. She may be from Poland, and the vendor says, "Oh, you sound like Melania Trump." And she identifies herself as being from Poland, I think. And he starts making comments about how much he adores Melania, and boy, does she ever have so much more class than that last woman who was in the White House. I think I took a break then. And I thought to myself, wow, how on earth do you move forward with a vision of healing and reparation and justice if you're standing in that place? But more if I'm standing in this place and that person's standing in that place. That's one perspective. Fast forward the next series of ideas that featured Wade Davis. It was called Light at the End of the World. And let me share with you something about Wade Davis so you know who he is. He is one of Canada's foremost anthropologists. He's written books about the great civilizations of South America and the exploration of Everest. Above all, he's advocated tirelessly for a better understanding of traditional cultures and how they might help us understand what it means to be alive on our planet. And this was the sentence that jumped out for me. It's genetics, he says, that really firmly allow anthropologists to say without doubt that every culture has something to say. Each culture deserves to be heard. And I thought, wow, we haven't gotten an A+ on that subject, have we? Just a little bit more about him and then a couple of stories that he shared. As his career developed, he moved away from botany and biology towards the biggest issues, which is, what is it that Indigenous peoples and their beliefs and practices can teach us about living in the world? If Western societies seem to have lost their way in how we relate to nature, if we're looking for answers to questions of what to do about logging, about mining, about drilling, perhaps Indigenous peoples can teach us something. For many years, he was an explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society with a mandate to travel, explore, and share something of the wealth of the world's cultures with a wide audience. Why? To keep us humble and to help us in the West to realize that we're just one in a long line of peoples who share this planet. And he told two stories in particular that I thought were interesting or stuck with me. Told one of being somewhere in the Middle East. Forgive me, I don't recall the details, but he was traveling with a group who were on the move as refugees. They had left a country somewhere in the Middle East. They were Muslim. They did not have enough water. They did not have enough food. It was not 100% clear that they were going to make it across the desert safely to their destination. And he was accompanying them as the traveler in residence from National Geographic. And he spoke about the first night that they stopped to set up camp and emphasizing again that they did not have what they needed to survive this trip themselves, but the little that they scraped together for the evening meal, he was the first they served. Why? Because deeply ingrained in that Middle Eastern tradition, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, is that foundational principle of hospitality. You serve your guest first, whether or not your guest is a friend or a stranger. The guest gets served first. And he was experiencing this hospitality in a Western communication backdrop that was demonizing the Muslim perspective and culture. Interesting, don't you think? The next story he shared was of visiting an indigenous community in Ecuador. And he says the first time he went there, the place was crawling with missionaries. And the next time he went there, the missionaries were all gone. And his question to the leadership there was, why did you put up with those missionaries? Why do you put up with the missionaries who are basically coming to tell you that your understanding of culture and spirituality is wrong? And I had to ask that same question. Wow. Why did everybody put up with the missionaries except for the fact that half of them had guns in their hands? So just to recap, when you look at the point of view that's coming out of a gun show in Alabama and the entire political vision behind it, I guess I want to be able to say, if your political perspective causes you to sin, it's got to go. We agree with that, don't we? But then let's go to Wade Davis's story. If your perspective of other cultures and other spiritual traditions causes you to sin, that perspective has to go. So I'm going to circle back to where this conversation started 2 weeks ago when I shared with you some excerpts from the book, The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. The story tells of, this is her pen name, a woman who was a writer finding herself bedridden because of a chronic illness. And one of her friends, in bringing in a potted plant, also brought in a snail that became her most treasured companion when her only perspective was from the bed, primarily horizontal, and she had to prop up books in order to read them, but had a whole team of people bringing books so that she could research this newfound friend of hers, and as a result wrote this book. And I shared with you a couple of weeks ago some of the universe that is the snail. But who would know? Because do we even look? Can we even see? So let me read the opening to one of her final chapters. And we're talking about perception, right? Where we are standing and what we see from where we're standing. One morning I searched for the snail, but as usual, it was hard to find. I looked again among the ferns and mosses and around some lichened branches. It was not foraging for calcium at the pile of crumbled eggshell. It was not by the little tree, nor was it near the mushroom. It was not high on the terrarium glass, nor was it by the mussel shell. It was not by the little batch of eggs it had laid several weeks earlier. It was not in any of its many hiding places. It had vanished. As the hours passed, the situation seemed more and more futile. And I realized that I was almost more attached to the snail than to my own tenuous life. There is a certain depth of illness that is piercing in its isolation. The only rule of existence is uncertainty, and the only movement is the passage of time. One cannot bear to live through another loss of function, and sometimes friends and family cannot bear to watch. An unspoken, unbridgeable divide may widen. Even if you are still who you were, you cannot actually fully be who you are. Sometimes the people you know will withdraw, and then even the person you know as yourself begins to change. There were times when I wished that my viral invader had claimed me completely. How much better to live an exuberant life and then leave as one exits a party simply opening a door and stepping out. Instead, the virus took me to the edge of life and then left me trapped in its pernicious shadow with symptoms that, barely tolerable one day, became too severe the next, and with the unjustness of unexpected relapse that overnight erased years of gradual improvement. In a March 2009 article in The New Yorker, Atul Gawande wrote, "All human beings experience isolation as torture. Illness isolates. The isolated become invisible and the invisible become forgotten. But the snail kept my spirit from evaporating. Between the two of us, we were a society all our own. And that kept isolation at bay. The snail was missing. And as the day waned, I was bereft." So here, another place to stand from which to understand the universe of a snail. That from where she was in her bed became the universe that saved her. The universe that became her home, even as she was unable to fully relate to her friends. I don't think we realize how deeply our vision has been shaped by the perception of Western Christian values. And so I think as we move forward with humility, we need the wisdom of those who understand anthropology, and as a result, probably get to the conclusion that we all come from the same place before even theology did. Or the biologists who suggest as well that this home of ours and all of its inhabitants, well, we're all connected. And I don't think that's the sea or those are the waters that we've been swimming in as those who've inherited the Judaic Christian tradition. Somehow we are constantly going back to our own truths without recognizing that there may be another way that in this time and place will get us to that destination of the peaceable kingdom a little better than we have. So, theology provides a window. Anthropology provides a window. Biology provides a window. And as those who are heirs of this tradition, I think we need to be in conversation with those who share those other perspectives in the spirit of humility, in the spirit of holding our hands open and receiving. That is a very, very different stance than the history of this tradition that has stood from above and has handed out the truth. G.K. Chesterton is reported to have said, "Christianity isn't a failure. It just hasn't been tried yet." I think we gather here as a community because we have a sense that it is compassion and justice and kindness and tenderness that holds us together, not doctrine or truth or righteousness. I invite you now, during this time for contemplation, to consider these wise words from Mary Oliver. Let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, "Look," and laugh in astonishment and bow their heads.